There's been plenty of incredible playoff performances, which have rightfully gone down as both legendary and unforgettable. But there's even more which have been completely overlooked. So today, we're going to try something new and take a deep dive into 5 of the more forgotten playoff performances in NBA history, starting with Michael Redd in the first round of the 06 playoffs. In the summer of 05, Michael Redd had signed a huge deal with Milwaukee, and this season saw him fully come into his own and prove he was worth every penny, while willing his Milwaukee Bucks to 40 wins, which got them the 8th and final spot in the East. And all they had to do was get through the 2-time defending conference champion Detroit Pistons. But it was their own fault. They had lost the season finale to the Washington Wizards, but if they had won that game, they would have instead been the 5th seed, taking on the Cleveland Cavaliers in round 1. Then with Chicago and Indiana both winning their games, the Bucks fell to 8th. But what's done is done, and the Bucks knew that they had nothing to lose going into the series with the 64-win Pistons. And while these mid-2000s Pistons possessed one of the greatest defenses of all time, they knew that Redd could hurt them. And he had, as he had averaged 30 points over their 4 regular season meetings, and had been lights out from beyond the arc. And that's saying a lot, as the Pistons were a team who only allowed about 90 points to opponents. But enough talking, let's get to the series. And that's not a good start. But it's not really a surprise either. The Pistons stuck to their game plan and made every shot difficult for Redd, because they could, as Milwaukee didn't have much for shot creators outside of Redd. So Detroit just sent the house and chased him off the 3-point line as much as possible, as he had just one long-range attempt and missed it. And 11 points from your star player just isn't going to cut it. And honestly, the Bucks' only hope was for Redd to play some of the best basketball of his career going forward. But maybe things would be a little easier on Redd, as Richard Hamilton had tweaked his ankle in Game 1 and wouldn't be 100%. Which may mean less or more of the grabbing that the Bucks were complaining about after Game 1. But either way, Milwaukee planned to combat this physical play with physical play of their own, in setting more screens. But Game 2 comes and goes, and it's another double-digit loss for the Bucks. However, it's a little different this time. The Bucks nearly dropped 100 points, and Redd was responsible for 29 of those, looking a lot more like he did versus the Pistons in the regular season. But the defense-oriented Pistons got rolling on offense, as 6 players scored in double figures. And if they kept up that kind of play, then the Bucks really had no chance. But for now, the Pistons hadn't done anything except take care of business at home, with the series heading back to Milwaukee.
Bucks looking for numbers, they've got it, it's a 3-on-2, Redd on the move, 1-1, Redd and Ford, Redd.
But look at that, there's signs of life, and Redd had resurrected the Bucks' chances in the series, as after a 14 of 21 shooting performance with 4 3-pointers, Redd had dropped 40 points on the Pistons. And I don't think the Pistons were happy about this, as it seemed like Redd had even gotten under Richard Hamilton's skin a little bit. But it wasn't just Redd, as point guard TJ Ford would dish 15 assists, and the bench would produce 47 points, with third-year guard Mo Williams exploding, with 20 points, while missing just 1 of 10 shots. And after Ben Wallace picked up 2 early fouls, the Pistons had to tone down the aggressiveness. And Milwaukee had played their game, and hit more 3-pointers than the first 2 games combined, but had also gone away from their aggressive approach on the offensive glass, to limit Detroit's transition opportunities. So had Milwaukee figured out Detroit? Or did they get lucky from a perfect performance from Michael Redd? Whatever the answer is, Redd had a pretty good follow-up performance in Game 4, with a team-high 33 points. But the Bucks had taken just 10 threes, with half of these being Redd's, even though he only made 1. But with 15 free throw attempts, it made sense to shy away from the deep ball. And while it was another double-digit loss, the Bucks had actually gone to the 4th with a lead, after TJ Ford had poured in 16 third-quarter points. But fourth-quarter foul trouble neutralized him, and a free throw off between Redd and Billups saw Billups come out on top, while living up to his Mr. Big Shot nickname. And a game which at one point was winnable for the Bucks had now ended with Milwaukee's back against the wall, But still, Redd had scored 73 points over the last 2 games, and was averaging over 33 points since Game 1, so maybe he could will the Bucks to see another day. Unfortunately, yet not really surprisingly, the answer to that is no, but it wasn't for lack of trying, as Redd had 23 points and 8 offensive rebounds, but he still did what the Pistons wanted him to do, attempting just 1 deep ball all game. But it was basically over before it started, as Redd had just 2 points in a first quarter, which saw Milwaukee fall behind by 16, and Rip Hamilton would get his revenge for Game 3, with 40 points of his own, as Milwaukee had given up 122 points in a blowout loss. So yeah, there wasn't really anyone who had picked the Bucks to win, but Michael Redd actually made the Pistons sweat a bit, with the best playoff series of his career by far, but also his last. But now let's take a look at a Milwaukee Buck who won his first round playoff series, and did something that no one else in NBA history could do. After 2 losing seasons with the San Diego Clippers to begin his career, Terry Cummings was traded to the Milwaukee Bucks, going into the 84-85 season, where he would immediately excel, finishing the year as an MVP candidate, as the Bucks ended the year as the 2 seed in the East, and would get matched up with a Chicago Bulls team, led by their star rookie. But it turned out that that rookie was relieved, as this was the matchup that he wanted. But Jordan might have been reconsidering that stance, as after he came out on fire in the first half of Game 1 with 19 points, the Bucks stifled him in the second, allowing just 4 more points from the star. And while Sidney Moncrief stole the show in Game 1 with 30 points on the offensive end, while frustrating Jordan on defense, Cummings had chipped in an efficient 22 points in a good win for the team, as the postseason had gotten off to a good start for the Bucks. But come Game 2, Cummings would really come alive. So with a great performance from Cummings, the Bucks had taken a 2-0 lead. But going into the fourth, Cummings only had 14 points, and the Bucks only had a 3-point lead. But they ultimately would win by 7. So how did they stave off the Bulls? Pretty simple actually. Cummings dropped 16 in the final frame to keep the Bucks ahead and finished tied with Jordan with a game-high 30 points. As Cummings had made it crystal clear, he just wanted the ball. And with 11 rebounds to his name, it was a performance to be proud of, as now the Chicago-born Cummings was heading to his hometown for Game 3. So the Bulls made sure that they weren't going to be swept, winning Game 3 by a single basket, as Jordan and forward Orlando Woolridge combined for 63 points. But not to be outdone were Cummings and Moncrief, as they combined for 65 points. However, the Bucks got little offense from the rest of the team, and although it came in a losing effort, Cummings had poured in 37 points on 15 of 20 shooting. But the Bucks did have a chance to win the game late, yet Ricky Pierce had his shot blocked. And after the game, the Bulls' Dave Greenwood was more than relieved that Cummings hadn't taken the shot. And that's because he was supposed to, as the potential game-winning play had been drawn up for Cummings. But when Cummings couldn't get himself free for the alley-oop pass, it forced Moncrief to throw it anyway, which led to a Bulls steal and a Bucks loss. But Milwaukee had to put that in the past with Game 4 coming up. And now the series had kind of just turned into a one-up contest between Cummings and Jordan.
Here's Pierce, a 2-on-1. Cummings gets the hook. You saw with a 10-rebound advantage. Cummings will shoot it over Green. Get right here. Cummings shoots over Greenwood. Oh, man.
But in Game 4, neither one of them would up the other, each leading their teams with 29 points. But Cummings hadn't really taken care of the ball, committing 8 turnovers. But this is where the Bucks showed that they were just the better team, with 3 guys scoring at least 20. But it was Cummings who took them home, as after missing 2 key free throws, he would make his final 6, all coming within the final 32 seconds of the game, to put it out of reach and secure them their 3rd win, to advance to the 2nd round to take on Philly. But the Bucks would go down quietly in the 2nd round series. But Cummings had still accomplished something in the 1st round series that no one else would do in NBA history, which is outscore Michael Jordan in a playoff series. But let's get out of the 1st round and jump almost 20 years ahead to a Western Conference semifinals matchup. A now 10-year pro Nick Van Exel had just finished his first full season with the Dallas Mavericks, after being traded to Dallas at the deadline last year. And this season had seen him act as one of the league's best sixth men, with him playing quite well in a first-round series with Portland, which almost saw Dallas blow a 3-0 lead. But they survived, and were now set to take on the Kings. The same Kings who had pushed the defending champion Lakers to 7 games last season. And Dallas would need Van Exel to be one of their key contributors. But after Game 1, it wasn't looking good for Dallas. The Kings had come into their house and beaten them by double digits. But Van Exel had kicked off the series with an impressive 20 points off the bench, as one of 4 Dallas scorers to drop at least 18. But it was discouraging, because Dallas had played a great game. It was just that Sacramento played better. But Van Exel also felt that the Mavs were giving the Kings too much respect. So I guess that means that Van Exel would play disrespectfully for the rest of the series. So the Mavs won Game 2 easily. They were on their way to a win anyway, but it was all but guaranteed when Chris Webber went down in the third quarter. Diagnosis? A torn meniscus, and out for the series. So now the Mavs had no excuse not to make it through the Kings. Oh, and I guess I haven't mentioned yet that Van Exel did play disrespectfully, exploding in the first half by dropping 19 points on 8 of 9 shooting off the bench, as Dallas put up 83 points before the break. Then while Van Exel wasn't really needed in the second half, he still added another 17 to bring his game-high total to 36 points, with the Mavs evening the series. And Van Exel wasn't forcing these scoring outbursts. He had to do this, with Michael Finley having struggled the entire postseason so far. So Nick Van Exel was now the X factor, and if the Mavs followed his lead, they liked their chances.
Yeah, he can make that little jump one. Van Exel. We wanted to send them our best as well. This is for the tie. It is a Van Exel 3.
The last thing you'd want to do was give Van Exel extra motivation. But playing in front of a hostile Kings crowd only seemed to make him better. And this game was an instant classic. Van Exel had dropped an impressive 15 points in the first half. Then he led all Mavs scorers with 17 in the second half, as the Mavs were down 2, with regulation about to end. But Van Exel decided that he wanted to play a little bit longer.
Van Exel will. 7 to shoot. Van Exel in the lane for the tie. He got it. Timeout, Sacramento.
So his incredible shot would force overtime. But it seemed like he had used up all his offense in regulation, after failing to record a shot attempt in the first overtime. But the teams were still tied, and Van Exel left it all out there in the second OT.
Hey, look at that Van Exel snarl.
Mike Bibby had said that he wasn't going to let Nick Van Exel replicate his 36-point outing, but early in the second OT, Bibby fouled Van Exel, leading to a 3-point play. So now Van Exel was at 35, and Bibby was on the bench, as he had fouled out. Then after one more 3-pointer and a couple late free throws, Van Exel finished with 40, and the Mavs finished with a 2-1 lead, as everyone was hoping that Van Exel would keep his hot hand. But he went ice cold in Game 4, draining 2 of 11 shots and finishing with 5 points, and just not showing the effort or the urgency needed in a playoff series. But in his defense, no one on the Mavericks could get the lid off the basket, and the series was again tied, heading back to Dallas. So Game 5 wouldn't be 40 points, but you were definitely a lot happier when Van Exel put up 18. And with Steve Nash beautifully directing the offense, all the Mavs starters plus Van Exel scored in double figures. And the Mavs rebounded from a poor first quarter to completely run away with it in the second half, with Van Exel scoring 13 of his 18 in the final 24 minutes. And now the Mavs were 1 win away from their second conference finals appearance in franchise history. But there they were again, putting their fans through every emotion in a disappointing Game 6 loss. Van Exel tried to save them with 35 points and 5 made threes. But with Dirk and Michael Finley going scoreless from the field in the fourth quarter, the Kings were able to hold onto their lead and force a do-or-die Game 7. And Van Exel knew that they had let an opportunity slip away, and that they couldn't let it happen again. And it looked like they were heading to disappointment, with most of the Mavs starters struggling in the first half. But Van Exel did what a sixth man is supposed to. scoring 15 points by halftime as Dallas held a 5-point lead. Then with Finley and Nash heating up in the second half, Dallas would pull away, and the Mavs had finally broken through to the conference finals. And while these Mavs are often remembered for their big three, Nick Van Exel gave an MVP performance, and may have very well saved a legacy or two during this postseason. And now let's look at another guy who was nearing the end of his career when he chose to light it up in the playoffs. It's Game 1 of the 1997 Western Conference First Round Series between Phoenix and the defending conference champion Seattle Supersonics. And while 9-year pro Rex Chapman has always been a guy who could fill it up, no one was expecting what he would do in this game. Chapman had spent the season with Phoenix, working his way into an important role as part of a talented guard rotation, which included Jason Kidd and Kevin Johnson, as the Suns were now set to take on a high-powered Sonics team. And great guard play was the Suns' only hope. But with Johnson and Kidd struggling to find their shot, Boy Wonder came to the rescue. Chapman had a slow start, making just 1 of 4 threes in the first. But in the second, it was 4 up, 4 down, as he was up to 22 points by halftime. Then with 9 points in the second and 11 in the third, while adding 4 more threes, Chapman had set a playoff career high and NBA playoff record with 9 3-pointers, en route to an incredible 42 points. And his final three with 55 seconds left put the game out of reach, as Phoenix stole one in Seattle. However, even though Kidd and Johnson weren't scoring, the ability those two had to penetrate to the hoop at will is why Chapman continued getting open looks, even if he was red hot. And with Kidd playing hounding defense on the Sonics' Gary Payton, Seattle knew that they had a battle in store for them. And Chapman knew that the Sonics weren't going to take it easy either, and come out hard in Game 2. And he was right, but he was the only Sun that looked even a little prepared for that. Johnson and Kidd combined to shoot 1 of 19 from the field, and while Chapman again led the Suns in scoring, his 18 points was a far cry from 42. But 50 points still wouldn't have mattered, with the Sonics recording one of the most lopsided playoff victories in NBA history. But at least the Suns had stolen one in Seattle. Chapman finally had some help on the offensive end in Game 3, as Johnson would go for 22 points, and Wes Person dropped a team-high 28 off the bench. But the Suns' most consistent offensive producer remained Chapman, as he dropped 23 points. And with the Suns going to the fourth quarter, up by just 1, Chapman's 12 points in the final frame helped them pull ahead and stay ahead, as the favored Sonics were on the brink of elimination, with no answer for Rex Chapman. And at this point it was clear that Phoenix was going to try and beat the Sonics with small ball, and with slower and older guys like Detlef Schrempf, Sam Perkins, and especially a 35-year-old Terry Cummings on a surgically repaired knee, playing big minutes for the Sonics, the small ball approach was genius. But now Kevin Johnson was playing with a bad ankle, and Game 4 started poorly for the entire Suns team. But in the second half, things turned around. Kidd's defense on Payton hurt the Sonics' offense, and Chapman hurt them on defense, as after going 1 for 8 in the first half, he went 8 for 13 in the second half, hitting 4 threes and scoring 20 points. But his final 3 of regulation was one that he'll never forget.
Chapman for the tie!
So Chapman's off-balance running 3 sent the game to overtime, but Phoenix went ice cold in the extra frame, and the Sonics survived. And after the game, Hersey Hawkins would put it best, as no one was willing to roll over in the series. But the Suns still needed one more win, except now it had to come on the road. So the Suns went full small ball in Game 5 by starting Person, but this move led to them having no firepower off the bench. And with KJ continuing to struggle, it was going to be an uphill battle for the Suns, especially after falling behind by 22 in the first half. But they weren't coming back from this, and Chapman would close out his season with a modest 16-point performance. So while the Suns fell short, they wouldn't have gotten as close as they did if not for an incredible series from Chapman. And while his overall performance might be forgotten, that Game 4 shot will live on forever. But now let's go to our last player, who actually spent a little time on that 97 Suns team. The 1995 NBA Finals. A battle of giants. Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon versus Superman, Shaquille O'Neal. And with other names like Clyde Drexler and Penny Hardaway taking the court, the spotlights were fixed, but a third-year Robert Horry quietly put together one of the best all-around series, and especially finals, of all time. Horry had already been playing well throughout the playoffs, and was only getting better as the Rockets went further, but his finals performance would warrant MVP consideration. He would kick off Game 1 by stuffing the stat sheet, with 19 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists. But his two-way play was what set him apart, as Horry would even outpace Hakeem in both steals and blocks. Oh, and unsurprisingly, he was clutch, on both ends of the ball, as without him, the Rockets probably don't win Game 1. But Hakeem got the glory, as the Rockets would take a 1-0 lead. And just like that, the 6-seeded Rockets are up 2-0, and had done it more convincingly than in Game 1. And it was nothing crazy for Horry, with 11 points and 10 rebounds. But let's ask LeBron how many steals he had.
Not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7.
Okay, so it was actually 7, which was also a finals record, as Horry was responsible for 7 of the Magic's 16 turnovers. Oh yeah, and he added 2 blocks as well. But with Sam Cassell stealing the show, Horry's performance again gets overlooked. But the Magic had to get it together fast, before it was too late. And we pick up with about 15 seconds left in Game 3. Up to this point, Horry has 17 points, 9 rebounds, and 4 assists. Yet another all-around performance, overshadowed, this time by great showings from the Rockets' aging Phi Slamma Jamma duo. But Horry made sure that the spotlight would shine over him at least once in this series. But really quick, let's look at this article from the Associated Press, from right before the final series began. Interesting.
6. Horry for 3. Robert Horry.
So Horry's three-pointer would put the Magic ahead for good, and Houston took a 3-0 lead. But Horry called it. Going back to that article, he said the three-point shot would be the difference maker. And sure, that's a given, but who cares? Horry called it. And with the Rockets having had completed a trade last season, which would have sent Horry to the Pistons for Sean Elliott, before medical concerns caused it to fall through, they were happier than ever that it didn't work out. And I haven't even mentioned the effect that he had on Horace Grant. As while Grant was an efficient offensive performer in this series, it was at a much smaller scale than it had been in some of Orlando's earlier series. And that was because of Horry, as not only did Horry exploit his mismatch on offense, with Grant not being a perimeter defender, he also just forced Grant to exert a lot more energy, making him less effective on offense. And the Rockets could close it out in Game 4. Yet while the win totals didn't show it, the Magic hadn't made this an easy series for Houston, and it was anyone's game going into the fourth quarter of Game 4. But the championship pedigree took over for Houston, as they pulled away, and Horry ended the game with 21 points and 13 boards, while draining 4 threes. And the 6-seeded Rockets were back-to-back champions, with some publications understandably believing that Robert Horry should be named MVP of the finals. And while Hakeem equally deserved the honor, you can't look at Horry's numbers and say they weren't MVP worthy. But as everyone knows, Robert Horry was just getting started. And I think that's where we'll end it off, on my first attempt at a deep dive into some forgotten playoff performances. Let me know what you think in the comments, what you liked and what you didn't. And maybe I can do it again sometime. But for now, thanks for checking out the video, subscribe if you're new, and take a look at the channel for plenty of deep dives into some forgotten players. See you next time.